Joy Spring is a tune from 1954, I think, by Clifford Brown. In this video, we'll learn it, and I'll talk about different techniques that you can use to practice how to solo over it. We'll learn the head first, and then I'll show you some ideas for soloing. And then I'm gonna try to answer a question from a subscriber, because you need to learn how to outline these 2/5s, these short 2/5s. But I guess if I understand the question correctly, what he's asking is, once you know how to do that, or when you know how to do that, how do you kind of break away from that? And because you can feel kind of trapped within those kind of chord changes. So later on in the video, I'll try to answer that question, and then we'll also look a little bit at what Joe Pass does with this tune. So if that sounds interesting, let's get started, shall we? So let's learn the head first. I'll put a metronome on 2 and 4. This melody has a lot of ornamentation. And one thing that I recommend doing is when you have a tune with a lot of ornamentation, try to learn it without the ornamentations first. Because I find that sometimes we can get trapped and we can kind of get stuck there trying to figure out exactly how to do it. So I have the melody written out without the ornamentation for you. So that's the first section. I'm in 5th position. I reach the D using my pinky. And then just slide it back to that C. If I want to add those chords there, you can do that. So then I'm treating it kind of like, it says in the real book A minor 7, but to me it's more like an F over A, right? To A flat 13, G minor 7. You don't need the bass notes, you can just play. But, so that A flat 13 is actually a D7 kind of, altered. It's a sub 5. But you could treat that chord differently. You could think of it as a diminished chord too, right? And then you get the kind of Barry Harris. I have a video called Barry Harris and the Idea of Movement where you can check out those ideas. But I think they play the A flat 13 on the recording. That doesn't mean that you have to do it. You can play diminished if you want to, but that could also work. Going down chromatically like that. And then the whole thing repeats a half step up, right? That's one of those places in the real book where the chord is wrong too. So if you want to add those ornamentations, that's kind of tricky to do on the guitar. You could do 2 quick upstrokes in a row like that. Or you could move. But then you have to kind of go out of position. So you don't have to play those ornamentations. Remember, this is horn tune. It's like it's a horn playing this. It fits the trumpet probably very well. It doesn't lend itself to this instrument. I was struggling with this, I remember, and my teacher told me, well, don't play those ornamentations. And I was like, oh yeah, you can do that. So on the one hand, it's a good idea to kind of try to reach beyond this instrument and try to sound like a saxophone or a trumpet. But it's at the same time, it's good to kind of realize that we're playing guitar. So that's the kind of decisions you have to make. Then there's next section. Here I'm going to put the metronome on every beat so you can hear how the melody falls on beat 4. And then you're back A section. 4. So the chord should be on that beat. There's actually like a hemiola, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. On the recording, the rhythm behind that melody is kind of they're playing hemiolas. So that's pretty cool, but you don't play those shots when you're soloing. You can hint to them, but you don't play them all the time because it kind of disrupts the flow of the solo, I think. Again, there's a bunch of ornamentation. Like that. You can do that, but you don't have to. Again, you don't have to. Then there's this debate. Is it like that? Or is it? I think it's G natural. Right? That's what it says in the real book, and I think to me it sounds like it's a G, but a lot of people play G flat there because it's kind of the note in the key, so just something to be aware of. Okay, so that's the melody, and I'll put that on my Patreon page for my patrons. Now let's practice some scales and chord tones. So chord tones would be this, right? There's a better way, which I call the Coltrane patterns. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5 for major chords, and 1, flat 3, 4, 5 for minor chords. I'll explain later why I prefer that way of practicing chord tones, but let's just do it first. Again, this is also on my Patreon page. The best source of information if you want to study this stuff is the book by Jerry Bergonzi called Melodic Structures. I'm pretty sure it's called Melodic Structures, where he takes this concept and takes it pretty far. Once you master these, you can kind of improvise and edit them. That's what Bergonzi calls it, editing. So you play them in different directions. There, I'm just kind of trying to improvise using these shapes. You could play them backwards. Or different shapes, different permutations. That's one that I really like. I have made videos about this in the past. You can check out my video where I do this over Blues for Alice. Moving on to scales, and I prefer the Barry Harris techniques over Aebersold's chord scales. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna ignore the 2 chord. So the G minor C7 is just C7. So a C mixolydian scale, major scales for major chords. And anytime there's a 2-5, we play the scale that corresponds to the dominant chord. For the A minor 7 to A flat 13, I'm gonna play F major because it sounds like an F major chord to me. But I'm gonna play a flat 7 because that note fits the A flat 13 chord. It's almost like it's a D7 flat 9, right? So I'll play along with the muse score here actually. It sounds like this. And so on and so forth. Then maybe try to improvise using those scales. Just very simple. Then Bop Scales descending. Bop scale on major chord, add a flat 13 so that you get a chord tone on every strong beat and a passing note on every weak beat. So we need to understand that the 6th is the chord tone, not the 7th. By the way, that's kind of important to mention that it's something I often come back to in my videos, and I wish I had understood that earlier. We overrate the major 7 when we play jazz. When we play these kind of earlier tunes, well, this is not super old, it's from the 50s, right? But we need to think of the major chord as a 6th chord, not a major 7, because we have a root in the melody. If you play major 7, it's gonna clash with that note, but you can totally play major 7 when you're comping and everything. But think of the chord as a 6th chord. So chord tone, passing note, chord tone. So the major 7 is a passing note. Then C mixo bop, F major bop, E flat mixo bop. Here again, I'm just playing that scale because those notes fit it's that flat 9 of the A flat 13, so it sounds pretty good. Again, I'll play along with the muse chord. backing track is just from YouTube. It's Learn Jazz Standards, so I'll link to it in the description below. So I have made many videos about Bop Scales that you can check out, and I'm not gonna go over it in detail, but there's also a book by Jeremy Gonsi called Jazz Line. If you want to learn about Bop Scales, that's the best book I can recommend. Another thing is when you play the melody, you can throw in chord stabs. Like that, so a half step above, small shell voicings, maybe this one from F major. So that works with a major 7 there, because it's not clashing with the melody, right? Half step above, or and then half step above the A flat. I like to play that 6 chords, open triads like that. So what Joe Pass does when he plays it solo, he plays like A flat altered, D7 or D9, G13 to C13. So you can play that G minor as a dominant chord instead. So that's kind of interesting. But that's Joe Pass. He can do anything he wants. I do realize that I'm moving kind of fast with all this stuff. I'm kind of talking to those of you that I think are more or less familiar with this stuff already. I also have made many videos before where I cover Bop scales, Barry Harris scales, and the Coltrane patterns, all this stuff. So let's say that you know how to do that. Then you kind of want to break away from that. That might seem like a paradox, because it's like, well, if I'm not going to play like that when I solo, why bother practicing it? So if you need to know how to do that so that you can kind of not do that. So I'll read the question. It was from Marcus. This song is entirely full of short 2/5s. Hard to sound cool and not fragmented. Hard to play scales over it, and boring played with arpeggios. So let me just disagree with that. If you're really good, you can totally make it sound great with arpeggios. Also, again, if it's played really fast, sometimes people play this tune really fast. If you can really burn arpeggios, it's gonna sound cool, right? So it's not arpeggios in and of itself that's boring. It's, but I think I know what you mean. You can feel like all you're doing is like. Again, you need to know how to do that. Those kind of Parkerisms, the Charlie Parker, you know. But once you master that, you don't want to do that. It's kind of like learning how to talk, right? Like you learn the standard phrases, but once you actually start talking, you're not gonna use them maybe, but you still need to know how to use them, if it makes sense. Because everything you're gonna do is gonna be kind of based on that. Plus you need to know where you are. The whole reason why we're doing the chord tones exercise is not so that we're play like that is so that we know which chord we're on. The main problem I find with students that try to learn how to play over chord changes that doesn't know how to do that is that they're not aware of what chord they're on. You need to develop that ability, and the chord, that's why we practice chord tones and chord scales and all that stuff. But yeah, let's say you have developed that ability and now you want to break away from it. It's actually easier than you think. Just think key centers. Another way I want to answer that question is I wouldn't worry too much about that. I would worry more about being able to do this, what I just did up until this point in the video. If you can do that really, really well and you're strong with that stuff, then it's going to be easy to do the other stuff, not doing that. Because that's going to happen once you're on the bandstand, when you're on stage playing with good musicians, you're not going to go. You're going to start playing music. If you can do what I just did there in the video up until now. If you can't do that, if you're struggling finding the chord tones, if you can't find the corresponding scale to every chord, then you're not ready for, you know, jazz, bebop improvisation. So I would worry more about playing the correct scales when you're practicing, if that makes sense. But you can't totally play like that. So if you think key centers, the whole first thing is F major. You don't have to play, even though there's a couple of chords that don't belong there to the key. If you're just playing F major and your playing is strong in and of itself, it's gonna sound good. So what I like to do is to play like an F major 7 over C and then a C sus. Maybe there, and then play these chords. And then D flat sus to G flat over D flat. So like pedaling. And you can actually do that in iReal Pro. You can go in and edit. When you use the edit function, remember to click on duplicate, because when you start changing the chords, which is pretty easy to do, you might want to go back to the original chord changes. So if you pick duplicate, you get another version of the tune. So I did that and it looks like this. And I even use triads. So F over C to B flat over C, F over C, and then I kind of get rid of some of the chords so it's not as chordy. Another thing to do is to think of that next section as F sharp. Just shifting my thinking from G flat to F sharp gives me like a fresh perspective. So I'll play along the melody with these chord changes here, and I changed the swing too to the one called Jazz Even Eighths. Play F major here. So F sharp. So G major. F major. E flat, F sharp, F, and every now and then you might want to play those changes, right? Try to use intervallic shapes. Maybe change the groove completely to something else, maybe second line or New Orleans. Let's do New Orleans. I'm trying to use like ideas and motifs. And then I play those, outline those chords. Intervallic shapes. And pentatonics. F major pentatonic sounds great. I'm just gonna use major pentatonics. F sharp pentatonic. If I can play those outlines, those chords like that, it's great, but if I do it every time, all the time, it gets pretty boring. So thinking like that opens up the harmony. And if you play with good musicians, they're gonna respond to that, to start pedaling and playing more modally. So that's basically what we're doing, playing it modally. So Ionian over that whole section. So pentatonics, you can get into the pentatonics. There's plenty of ways you can use pentatonics. I was just kind of doing it very basic there. And yeah, I hope that answers the question a little bit and that you got something out of this. And thank you for your time and attention. And I shall see you next time.